My name is Mark Levene. I'm going to be talking about something horrible in this course, something in which millions of people died. In the years 1932 and 1933, a great wave of famine swept across the Soviet Union. Some areas were affected more than others. The areas we know about where it was particularly severe was in the Volga region, Siberia, parts of the Caucasus, and the Ukraine in particular. Soviet analysts themselves have suggested that the figure may have been something in the region of 7.7 million people who died directly from this famine. Other figures go much higher still. Even in the Ukraine itself, the figure of 10 to 20 million people dead has been suggested. Whatever the actual figure, what we do know is that what actually happened on the ground was something really horrible and grotesque. People who were living off the land, who normally had food, found that they were looking for the last pieces of grain, split grain, anywhere in the fields. They'd already eaten all their animals. They'd already eaten all the cats and dogs. They were looking for mice, for rats, for anything, for weeds to eat. When that failed, children would go out roaming in the countryside to find if there was anything else to eat. They would often end up in the towns and beg, and there droves of them died or were shipped off to camps or sometimes islands where they died. There doesn't seem to have been any assistance from the government to help these people. On the contrary, what's remarkable about this period of time is that grain procurement by the Soviet state actually increases to the point where everything, absolutely everything, is demanded of the peasants. They haven't got anything, but the state is saying you've got to increase your grain quotas. So shock brigades of activists are sent from the towns, very often young people in something called Komsomol. The youth brigades are sent into the countryside to go and scour for anything that they can find. When the peasants don't provide anything, they are sometimes shipped off to camps or deported to the Far East. Sometimes what happens, because there is a penalty, very severe penalty, if people do not hand over grain which they haven't got, they are executed. This happened in vast numbers. What ultimately happens in a famine sequence like this? Well, let's hear what one female doctor says of the situation in spring 1933. The good people died first. Those who refused to steal or to prostitute themselves died. Those who gave food to others died. Those who refused to eat corpses died. Those who refused to kill their fellow men died. Parents who resisted cannibalism died before their children did. Now this is interesting because cannibalism is one of those great taboos amongst most human societies. Yet we're very aware that in this particular famine, people were so starved that they resorted to cannibalism. Sometimes, no, not sometimes, often, of their own family members. Parents would eat children, children would eat parents, brothers, sisters. And the consequences of this catastrophe do not simply end there. Because if one thinks about it, there would have been women who were pregnant in this moment in time, and those who survive may have been able to carry through their children into life. But because of the fetal bad development as a result of malnutrition, a lot of those children have lots of abnormalities, and the average age for many of the children who survive is 10 years for boys, 7 to 8 years for girls. So something absolutely terrible is happening to the population. It's not just that so many millions may have died. In the Ukraine, the consensual figure amongst historians is put at 3 to 4 million. Maybe 3.9 million people died directly in the famine, out of the many million more who die in the Soviet Union at large. But one then has to add on the children who were not born or who died early. So what one ends up with is a population deficit, a demographic deficit in terms of the actual population in the late 1930s or early 1940s against the anticipated population had there been no famine. Now, the Ukraine itself, in the Ukraine today, these events are not treated as simply a terrible thing which happens. They are treated as a genocide, because the argument is that the responsibility for what happens is not simply a natural event, that because of those grain procurements and the way they are developed, and because of the wider context, a context of collectivization and industrialization, which is happening across the Soviet Union at large, something more malevolent is at stake. There had been other famines in Russia, but this one seems to have taken on a particular tone and register and nastiness. What's peculiar about the Ukraine is that this is a very rich agricultural area. The soil is called black earth, and it's amongst the richest agricultural soils in the world. So we've got a sort of problem to work through here. How come in such a rich agricultural area which can sustain millions of people off the land, you end up with a famine situation? And is it just one of those things that happened, or is there a human responsibility?